My mom stole my college fund and says that I am the one who owe her an apology. I'm a 19-year-old guy and my life pretty much turned upside down a few weeks before I was supposed to start university. It all started when I logged into my college savings account, expecting to see around $40,000, money that my mom and dad had been setting aside for years. But when I checked, the balance showed zero. I tried refreshing the page thinking there had to be some mistake, but it was still empty. All $40,000 gone. At first, I thought maybe my dad had moved the money to a different account or put it somewhere safer without telling me. My parents divorced when I was 13 and while they don't really get along, they always tried to keep things civil for my sake. I called him right away and he sounded just as surprised as I was. He told me he hadn't touched the account. After a few minutes of going back and forth, he suggested I talk to my mom. He seemed hesitant, like he already had a bad feeling about where this was going. I wasn't too eager to talk to her either. My mom and I have had a rocky relationship since the divorce. She always felt like she got the short end of the stick in the split, constantly reminding me of how much she had to give up. Still, I figured she wouldn't mess with my future like this. I mean, she knew how important college was to me. But when I called her and asked if she knew anything about the missing money, she acted confused and told me she had no idea what I was talking about. Something didn't sit right with me, so I pushed harder. I asked if she was sure she hadn't taken anything out. She kept deflecting, saying stuff like, "Why would I do that? And you know how tight things have been lately." Her tone was getting more defensive and that's when I started to realize she was hiding something. So I kept pressing until she finally snapped and admitted that she'd taken the money. She tried to justify it right away, saying she had no choice because of some debts and unexpected expenses that had come up. She went on and on about how hard things had been for her, how she was trying to keep things together, but it all just sounded like excuses. I could barely focus on what she was saying. I was just stuck on the fact that she drained my entire college fund. Everything I had been working towards, every plan I had made was now up in the air. I asked her how she could do that to me, knowing that this was the money I needed for school. She went quiet for a moment, and then she let out a long sigh, saying she never wanted to tell me this way. But then she slipped up. She mentioned something about paying off a new car. My mind went blank for a second. A car? And then she let slip about a vacation she took with her new boyfriend. It felt like a punch to the gut. I lost it. I don't remember all the words that came out of my mouth, but I know I shouted things I never thought I'd say to her. She shouted back, accusing me of being selfish and not understanding the sacrifices she made as a parent. She kept saying that she deserved to use some of that money because raising me had been expensive. She even tried to make it seem like she did this for us to keep herself afloat, but all I could think about was how she spent my future on a car and a vacation. I stormed out of that conversation feeling like the ground had been ripped out from under me. I called my dad and told him everything and he was furious. I could hear him trying to keep his voice steady as he promised to get involved and get my mom to pay back what she took. He even talked about taking legal action if she didn't cooperate, but I could tell he didn't have a lot of hope that she would just hand over the money. As the days went by, my mom kept doubling down. She sent me messages trying to justify her actions, saying that I didn't appreciate all the sacrifices she'd made. She even hinted that if I kept pushing, she'd cut me off completely. I wasn't even sure what she meant by that. She hadn't really been there for me in years. Still, it hurt to think that things had come to this point. I reached out to my grandparents on my mom's side, hoping they might be able to talk some sense into her. They were shocked and disappointed when they heard what she had done. They promised to try and help, but they also seemed wary of getting too involved in the mess. It was like everyone wanted to keep the peace, but I was the only one losing out because of it. I started thinking about my options. Should I try to take legal action? Would it even be worth the time and money, considering how much this would mess up our family even more? Part of me wanted to just let it go and try to figure out a way to make it work without that money. But then I'd remember how she had lied to my face and spent what was supposed to be my chance at a better future. I talked to a few friends about it, and they were as angry as I was. They suggested I go public, share my story online to put pressure on my mom, maybe even embarrass her into paying it back. I didn't know if that was the right move. I didn't want to wear all this dirty laundry for the world to see, but it felt like I was running out of options and I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. That's when I started looking into online forums and found people in similar situations. It was comforting in a way to see that I wasn't alone, but it also made me realize that I might need to fight harder than I'd thought. And maybe, just maybe, sharing my story could help me find some way to get justice for what my mom had done. So I decided to write this post and see what advice or support might come my way. Update 1. After my initial Reddit post went up, I didn't expect it to blow up the way it did. But within a few days, it had thousands of upvotes, and the comments were filled with advice, support, and some pretty harsh takes on my mom's behavior. People suggested everything from suing her to cutting off contact entirely. I even got a few private messages from people who had gone through similar situations. It was overwhelming, but at least I felt like I wasn't fighting this battle alone anymore. But then my mom found out about the post. She called me up furious, saying I was airing family business to strangers on the internet. She demanded that I delete it immediately, accusing me of trying to ruin her reputation. I could hear the anger in her voice, like she thought she could scare me into taking it down. I told her I wasn't going to do that, not when she still hadn't given back a single cent of my college fund. She hung up on me, but the damage was already done, she knew, and she wasn't going to let this slide quietly. After that, it didn't take long for the rest of the family to get involved. My aunts, uncles, and even a few cousins somehow found out about the situation. Some of them messaged me privately, telling me they understood why I was upset, but thought I should take down the post for the sake of the family. Others were more blunt, calling me selfish for dragging my mom's name through the mud. But then there were a few who actually sided with me, saying that what my mom did was completely wrong and that she should pay me back. My mom, though, was solidly in my corner. She suggested that we try mediation before things got even uglier. She thought maybe if we all sat down with a neutral third party, we could work something out without dragging this mess through the courts. I didn't think it would change much, but I was willing to try if it meant getting my college fund back. When she brought it up to my mom, though, she shut it down immediately. She told her that she had done nothing wrong and that I needed to respect her as my mother. She made it clear that she wasn't interested in talking things out, at least not if it meant admitting she had done anything wrong. So much for mediation. After that, the texts started coming in from my mom and they were nasty. She called me ungrateful and said that I was blowing this out of proportion. She told me I didn't understand what it was like to be a parent, how much she had sacrificed. She acted like I owed her, like the money she took was some sort of repayment for being her kid. I took screenshots of all the messages and shared some of them on Reddit, keeping everything anonymous, of course. The comments blew up again with people telling me to hang on to the evidence in case things went further. In the middle of all this, my uncle, my mom's older brother, reached out. He's always been distant. The kind of relative who shows up to holidays, but never gets too involved. So I was surprised when he sent me a long message saying he had my back. He told me he wasn't happy with what my mom did, and that if I needed any advice or help, I could count on him. It wasn't much, but it was the first time in days that I felt like maybe not everyone in the family saw me as the bad guy. But the drama kept escalating. My mom's boyfriend, the one she took on that vacation, messaged me too. He accused me of causing unnecessary drama and said that I should just let it go for the sake of the family. I didn't even respond. It was pretty clear where his loyalty lay, and I wasn't about to start arguing with someone who had benefited directly from my stolen college fund. The whole thing was starting to take its toll on me. One night, I just broke down. I didn't even know who to turn to anymore. Every conversation felt like a battle, and the pressure of figuring out my next steps was crushing. It felt like everything was slipping away from me and all I could do was watch. That's when some Redditors suggested I start a GoFundMe to try and raise enough money to cover at least some of my college expenses. I wasn't sure at first. It felt weird to ask for help from strangers. But then I thought about the deadline my university had given me to secure funding, and how I didn't have a lot of options left. So I set it up and shared the link on my original post. I couldn't believe what happened next. Donations started pouring in, small amounts at first, but then larger ones along with messages of support. Within a week it had gained serious traction. The total kept climbing and suddenly it felt like I might have a chance of making this work, even if my mom never gave back a dime. Of course, when my mom found out about the GoFundMe, she lost it. She called again, this time angrier than before. She accused me of trying to make her look bad and said that I was using this to turn people against her. She even threatened to sue me for defamation, saying that I was spreading lies about her. I reminded her that I hadn't named her or shared any personal details, but she wouldn't hear it. Meanwhile, the support kept coming in. People on Reddit sent me hundreds of messages encouraging me to keep going and reminding me that I wasn't in the wrong. Some even shared their own stories of dealing with difficult parents and toxic family situations. It was like a wave of solidarity pushing me forward when I felt like giving up. The university's deadline for funding was creeping up fast though, and I still didn't have enough to cover everything. That's when my dad told me he had a small savings account he'd kept hidden from my mom during the divorce. It wasn't much, only enough to cover about one semester, but it gave me a little more breathing room. I was touched that he had saved this for me, even if it wasn't the full solution. With the GoFundMe doing well and my dad's help, I started to see a glimmer of hope. But Redditors kept urging me to gather all the evidence I could, just in case my mom tried to make good on her threats. They pointed out that I might need it if I decided to take legal action. I wasn't sure if I was ready to go down that road yet, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let my mom walk all over me. Not anymore. Update 2. After the GoFundMe gained traction, I knew I needed to explore all my options. Some Redditors had recommended speaking to a lawyer, so I decided to take their advice. It took a bit of searching, but I found a local attorney who specialized in family disputes and financial matters. I set up a consultation and we went over the details of what happened, the emptied account, the lack of any written agreement, and the fact that my mom had spent the money on personal expenses. The lawyer listened carefully, then laid out my options. He told me that suing my mom could be a long, expensive process and might not be worth it if my mom didn't have the funds to pay even if we won. But he also suggested a middle ground, sending a formal demand letter asking for the money to be returned within 30 days. It wouldn't guarantee I'd get anything back, but it could put legal pressure on my mom and show her that I was serious. I decided to go ahead with the demand letter. The lawyer helped me draft it, keeping everything professional and to the point. We sent it out and I could only imagine how my mom would react when she saw it. It didn't take long to find out. She called me within hours, livid. She said I was tearing the family apart and that I was letting money come between us. But all I could think about was that she was the one who had taken the money in the first place. After a few minutes of her ranting, she hung up, but it was clear she wasn't going to cooperate. A couple of days later, I got a call from my grandparents, my mom's parents. They had heard about the letter, and while they weren't happy that things had escalated this far, they offered to help with legal fees if I decided to take things further. They told me they were disappointed in my mom's actions and hoped that she would do the right thing. It was a relief to know they were in my corner, even if it came with a bit of guilt for dragging them into the mess. Meanwhile, the Reddit community had a lot to say about the demand letter. Some users even offered edits to the language of the letter, suggesting changes that might make it more effective. It was strange taking legal advice from strangers on the internet, but it seemed like every bit of pressure might help. My mom must have been feeling that pressure too, because a few days later she took to Facebook with a long rant. In her post, she called me a disloyal child and accused me of turning the family against her. She went on about how she had done everything for me, and now I was trying to ruin her life over a simple misunderstanding. I found out about the post when a cousin sent me a screenshot, and it was surreal seeing my personal life laid out like that for everyone to read. But the backlash she got was immediate. Friends, neighbors, and even some extended family members started commenting in support of me, saying that she should pay back the money and that she was the one who had crossed the line. It didn't take long for word of the whole situation to spread beyond just our family. One local business owner, who had seen my story on Reddit, reached out with a job offer. They knew I was trying to save up for college and wanted to help. It wasn't the perfect solution, but it was something. I accepted the offer, figuring that every little bit would help me get closer to my goal of starting school, even if it was going to be later than I had planned. But my mom didn't let up. After the Facebook post backfired, she doubled down and refused to even acknowledge the demand letter. She told anyone who would listen that she was being harassed by me and my dad. She made it clear that she had no intention of paying back the money, claiming that she had every right to it. That's when my dad decided to file for an adjustment in child support. Even though I was about to turn 20, he hoped that it might put some more financial pressure on her and force her to take responsibility. Around this time, my uncle, the same one who had reached out earlier, shared something I hadn't known before. He told me that my mom had a history of financial mismanagement, including some old gambling debts. He hadn't mentioned this before because he thought my mom had turned things around, but now he realized that might not have been the case. It added a new layer to everything, making me wonder if the debts he mentioned were real after all, or if she just used them as an excuse to take my money. Then out of the blue, my mom's boyfriend broke up with her. Apparently, the stress of everything was too much, and he didn't want to be caught up in all the drama. My mom tried to spin it as if I was the one to blame, but from what I heard, he left because he didn't like how she was handling the situation. It was one more thing going wrong for her, and I could tell she was starting to unravel. Around this time my mom had a minor health scare. She ended up in the hospital for a few days, nothing serious, but she tried to use it as leverage. She reached out to me saying that the stress from the whole situation was affecting her health and that she hoped I would drop the matter for the sake of her well-being. I didn't respond to that message. I wasn't going to let her use a health scare as an excuse to avoid taking responsibility for what she did. With everything going on, the pressure was intense, but I decided to stay firm. Even with my mom's threats and attempts at guilt-tripping, I couldn't just let her get away with taking the money. The GoFundMe was still going strong, the job was helping me save up, and I knew that I had the legal support if it came down to a court case. I wasn't sure how much longer this fight would go on, but I knew one thing, I wasn't backing down. Update 3. Things escalated fast after we sent the demand letter. My mom refused to pay back the money, so my lawyer moved forward with filing a lawsuit. A few weeks later, my mom was served with the legal papers, and suddenly, things got real. It wasn't just angry phone calls or Facebook rants anymore. This was in the hands of the courts now. Not long after being served, my mom fired back with a counterclaim. She accused me of causing her emotional distress by sharing the story online and dragging her reputation through the mud. She argued that the Reddit post had damaged her standing in the community and made her a target for ridicule. I wasn't surprised that she tried to flip the narrative, but it still stung that she'd go this far to avoid taking responsibility. With the legal battle underway, my lawyer started the discovery process. This meant going through my mom's financial records, which turned up some surprising details. It wasn't just the new car and the vacation, there were purchases for expensive gadgets, a new entertainment system, and payments to some questionable online services. It was clear that my mom had been spending beyond her means for a while, and the money she took from my college fund had only been a temporary fix for a much bigger problem. Meanwhile, my story kept gaining traction on Reddit. Supporters shared it across different subreddits and even more people got involved. Some of them were able to find details about the case through public records, and the pressure on my mom kept building. It was a strange feeling seeing so many strangers rallying behind me, but their support was keeping me going. They reminded me that I wasn't alone in this fight. The GoFundMe I had set up kept growing too. It had already surpassed its initial goal and now it had enough to cover at least 2 years of tuition. I was blown away by the generosity of people I'd never met. Then, out of the blue, a distant relative I'd only met a couple of times reached out through the GoFundMe page. They left a substantial donation with a message saying they wanted to help make things right. It was enough to give me hope that I'd be able to start school sooner rather than later. While the online community was supporting me, things weren't going so well for my mom offline. Her counterclaim drew even more attention to the story and people in our town started to take sides. Some of her old friends and neighbors, who had initially stayed quiet, began speaking out against her. It wasn't long before word reached her workplace. I heard through a mutual connection that she had been put on probation at her job, with her employer citing concerns about her conduct outside of work. I could tell she was feeling the heat, but instead of backing down, she just got more desperate. One evening, my uncle reached out again, saying there might be another twist in all of this. He told me that when my grandparents had set up my college fund, they also set up a small trust fund that my mom had apparently tried to access a few years back. It wasn't a huge amount, but it added another layer to the story. One that painted my mom in an even worse light. My uncle suggested that if we could prove my mom had tried to dip into the trust fund before, it might help our case in court. In the middle of all this, I started receiving some strange anonymous messages. They came through different social media platforms and most of them were filled with insults and threats, accusing me of being a bad child and telling me to back off from my mom. I couldn't be sure who was sending them, but I had a pretty good idea that they were connected to my mom's friends, people who believed her side of the story. I took screenshots of every message and sent them to my lawyer, just in case things escalated further. Then, out of nowhere, my mom reached out trying to reconcile. She offered a half-hearted apology, saying she was willing to talk if I agreed to take down my Reddit posts and stop the legal action. But there was no mention of returning the money, and it felt more like damage control than a genuine apology. I turned her down and told her that I wasn't going to back down until she made things right. The conversation ended there, and I didn't hear from her again for a while. Not long after that, my mom's ex-boyfriend reached out to me. He sent a long message explaining how my mom had manipulated him too, making promises that she never kept. He said he was sorry for the role he played in everything and that he hoped I got the justice I deserved. It didn't change much, but it was a small validation that I wasn't imagining things. My mom really had been trying to manipulate everyone around her. Amidst all the chaos, I started my new job. It wasn't glamorous, but it felt good to have something to focus on besides the ongoing legal battle. I worked long shifts and saved every penny I could, knowing that it would help bridge the gap until I could access my GoFundMe funds for school. It felt like a small step toward reclaiming some control over my future. Then I got some unexpected good news from my university. They reached out to let me know they had reconsidered my situation and were offering me a partial scholarship. It wouldn't cover everything, but between the scholarship, the GoFundMe, and my job, I was closer than ever to making my college plans work again. For the first time in months, I felt like I could see a way forward. Around this time, the local community organized a small fundraiser event for me. It wasn't something I had asked for, but they insisted. They wanted to show support and help me get back on track. People from all over town showed up, sharing their encouragement and contributing what they could. It felt surreal seeing how this had become such a big story in our town, but I was grateful for the support. The legal battle was still ongoing, and I knew that the next steps wouldn't be easy, but I had more support than I ever imagined. From family, from strangers on the internet, and even from the people in my own community. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to give up. Not until my mom finally faced the consequences of what she had done. Update 4. The first court hearing came up faster than I expected. My mom and I both showed up with our lawyers, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was tense. It was strange seeing her there sitting just a few feet away, but it was like we were worlds apart. The judge laid out how the proceedings would go, and then it all began. My mom's lawyer was the first to speak. He launched into a speech about how my mom was a struggling single mother who had done her best to provide for me. He tried to make it sound like my mom was the real victim here, caught up in a misunderstanding. When my mom took the stand, she gave this emotional testimony, talking about how she had sacrificed so much for me over the years and how my actions had ruined her reputation and caused her unbearable stress. She kept wiping her eyes, trying to look sympathetic, but it felt more like a performance than anything else. Then it was my turn. My lawyer presented the evidence we had gathered, bank statements showing the withdrawals from the college fund, and records of my mom's extravagant purchases. He laid out how the money had been spent on the new car, the vacation, and other luxuries. I could see the judge taking notes, nodding as he listened to each point. It felt like we were finally being heard. The judge didn't hold back. He addressed my mom directly, warning her about the seriousness of the accusations and making it clear that if she had indeed taken the funds for personal use, there could be serious legal consequences. My mom's lawyer tried to interrupt, but the judge shut him down, insisting that this was a matter that deserved full attention. The tension in the room was thick, you could almost hear a pin drop. To my surprise, several members of the community had submitted letters of support on my behalf. They talked about my work ethic, my dreams of going to college, and how they had seen me trying to overcome the challenges my mom's actions had thrown in my path. The judge read through a few of them, taking note of the positive things they had to say. It felt like a small victory, knowing that the community hadn't turned their back on me, even with all the drama my mom had stirred up. Then things took a turn. My mom's lawyer switched tactics and went after my motives. He questioned why I had shared the story online, implying that I was only trying to shame my mom publicly to gain sympathy and money through the GoFundMe. He even suggested that I was using the situation as a way to manipulate people into donating to me. It was tough to hear, but my lawyer countered by pointing out that the Reddit post had come after my mom refused to address the issue privately. It was a back and forth that left the courtroom buzzing. Next, my dad took the stand. He talked about how my mom had a long history of making poor financial decisions and manipulating people to get what she wanted. He brought up the gambling debts that my uncle had mentioned, painting a picture of a woman who had always put her own interests above others. My mom didn't take it well. She interrupted him a few times, raising her voice until the judge had to step in and warn her to keep her composure. She looked like she was about to explode, but she managed to hold back for now. After my dad's testimony, my mom's lawyer called for a break. And when we returned, they made an offer. My mom proposed a settlement. She'd pay back a small fraction of what she took. And in return, I would drop the lawsuit and take down all the posts about the situation. It was way less than what she owed me, not even enough to cover a full semester of tuition. I didn't even have to think twice about it, I refused. My lawyer advised me that we should push for the full repayment and possibly even seek damages for the stress and trouble this whole mess had caused. That's when things got even more interesting. My mom's ex-boyfriend, the one she'd taken on vacation, reached out through my lawyer. He offered to testify on my behalf, saying he wanted to share what he knew about my mom's spending. He revealed that she had never mentioned financial struggles when they were together and had always acted like she had plenty of money to throw around. It added more weight to our case, and my lawyer didn't hesitate to include his testimony. Word of the case reached local media. A small news outlet picked up the story, turning it into a headline about a mom who allegedly stole her son's college fund. It wasn't exactly flattering for my mom, and it only increased the pressure on her. More people in town found out what was happening, and I heard through the grapevine that my mom was struggling with the attention. Her reputation was taking a serious hit, and I think she finally realized that this wasn't going to go away quietly. Back in court, my lawyer presented more detailed records of my mom's spending. We highlighted purchases she had made just after draining my account, things that couldn't be justified as basic living expenses. It painted a clear picture of someone who had used my college savings as a personal piggy bank. My mom's lawyer tried to argue that these purchases were necessary, but the evidence was too solid to ignore. After reviewing everything, the judge announced that he needed time to make a final decision. He wanted to go over all the evidence before issuing a verdict. My mom and I left the courtroom knowing that the next hearing could be the one that decided everything. The tension between us was thick, and I could see the frustration on her face, but there wasn't much left to say. As we walked out of the courthouse, I could hear people murmuring about the case, the whispers following us. It was clear that everyone was waiting to see how this would play out. All I could do now was keep moving forward and hope that justice would finally be served. Update 5. The final court hearing came, and it felt like the whole town was watching. My mom and I stood on opposite sides of the courtroom, each of us with our lawyers ready for closing arguments. The air was thick with tension. My mom looked worn down, but there was still a stubbornness in her eyes. My lawyer presented our side, emphasizing the evidence we had uncovered, every dollar that had gone missing, every bank statement that showed my mom's spending spree. He wrapped up by asking the judge to hold my mom accountable for taking the money that was meant for my education. My mom's lawyer made one last attempt to paint me as a manipulative son who had dragged my mom through the mud for sympathy. He tried to claim that the emotional distress my mom suffered from the Reddit post outweighed any mistakes my mom might have made, but the judge didn't seem swayed by their arguments. He took a deep breath and addressed the courtroom, delivering his verdict. The judge ruled in my favor. He ordered my mom to repay the full amount of the $40,000 she had taken from my college fund. He emphasized that the money was intended for my education and that my mom's actions had directly jeopardized my future. He also added that if my mom didn't start making payments soon, further legal action could be taken against her. As soon as the hearing ended, my mom stormed out of the courtroom. People gathered outside, curious about the outcome, and she couldn't hold back her anger. She had a full-on meltdown right there on the courthouse steps, yelling about how everyone had turned against her, me, my dad, the judge, even the community. She claimed she was the real victim, that she had only tried to do what was best for me. It was chaotic, with people watching in shock and some even recording it on their phones. The scene quickly made its way to social media, and my mom's ranting only made things worse for her. The community's reaction was immediate. Word spread that the judge had ruled in my favor, and people started treating it like a victory. They congratulated me when they saw me at work or around town, saying that justice had finally been served. Even people who had stayed neutral before seemed relieved that my mom was being held accountable. It felt like the whole town was rallying behind me, and the local news picked up the story again, framing it as a case of a young guy standing up for what was right. But my mom wasn't done fighting. Even with the court order, she refused to pay back the money. Days passed, then weeks, and nothing came through. My lawyer warned me that we might need to take further action, so we started the process to garnish her wages. It was the only way to ensure that I'd actually see the money that the court said I was owed. My mom tried to argue against it, but the legal system wasn't on her side anymore. Meanwhile, the divide in the family grew even deeper. Some of my relatives cut ties with my mom entirely, saying they couldn't support what she had done. Others still thought I should have kept the whole thing private, but they stopped trying to pressure me to back down. It felt like the family was split down the middle, and there wasn't much hope of repairing the rift anytime soon. Just when I thought things might be settling down, I got another piece of good news. The university I had been accepted to reached out, offering me a full scholarship. They had been following the story and decided that my situation warranted the extra support. It was like a weight had been lifted. I finally had a clear path forward, and I wouldn't have to rely entirely on the GoFundMe to pay for school. But my mom's troubles weren't over. The negative attention surrounding the case caught up with her at work, and she ended up losing her job. I heard about it through mutual acquaintances, and while I wouldn't wish that kind of situation on anyone, it was clear that her refusal to take responsibility had consequences. It wasn't long before she issued a public apology through a social media post, claiming that she was sorry for everything and hoped we could rebuild our relationship. But it felt like too little, too late. I didn't respond and I kept my distance. It wasn't about holding a grudge, it was about knowing that some things couldn't just be forgiven with a few words. With the garnished wages, the full scholarship, and the remaining donations from the GoFundMe, I was finally in a stable position. I could afford to focus on my studies without worrying about how to make ends meet. The community continued to show support, and I knew that I had a lot of people rooting for me to succeed. I shared a final update on Reddit, letting everyone know how things had turned out. I wrote about the court's decision, the scholarship, and how I was planning to move forward with my life. The post went viral, with thousands of upvotes and comments from people who had been following my story from the start. Many congratulated me for standing my ground, and some even shared how my story had inspired them to stand up for themselves in tough situations. It felt like I had come full circle, from that first post where I was unsure what to do, to this moment where I could finally close this chapter. Reflecting on everything, I realized how much my perspective on family and trust had changed. It's hard to describe what it's like to be betrayed by someone who's supposed to look out for you, but it's even harder to fight back when it feels like the world is against you. But through all of it, I learned that sometimes you have to stand up for yourself even when it's messy and painful. As I wrapped up my last Reddit update, I left a message of gratitude to everyone who had supported me, from the kind strangers online to the neighbors in my town. I promised to focus on my studies and work toward a better future, and then I logged off for what I hoped would be the last time in a while. It was time to focus on my new beginning and leave the past behind. The future still has its uncertainties, but for the first time in a long while, it feels like I'm the one in control. And I'm ready for whatever comes next.